The grand reception hall of the Astor Estate sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. Every detail was perfectly orchestrated for what promised to be the wedding of the year. Alexander Sterling, CEO of the technological empire Sterling Industries and one of the richest men in America, adjusted his Italian silk tie while observing the final preparations. At 38 years old, he had everything a man could desire. A fortune estimated at several $billion, an irreproachable reputation in the business world, and in a few hours, he would marry Caroline Sinclair, heiress to an aristocratic New York family. Yet something tormented him, an anxiety he couldn't manage to chase away despite all his efforts to appear serene. "Mr. Sterling, the first guests are beginning to arrive," discreetly announced his personal assistant Philip, a man in his 50s who had worked for him for over 15 years. Alexander nodded, his gray eyes scanning one last time the guest list he held in his hands. 350 hand-picked people, ministers, ambassadors, captains of industry, cinema and fashion celebrities. All had come to celebrate his union. But only one person on this list truly mattered to him, and it was precisely the one whose presence anguished him the most. Emily Hayes, his first love, his first passion. The one who had shared his life for 5 intense years before a tragic misunderstanding separated them forever. It had now been 8 years since they last saw each other. 8 long years during which Alexander had built his financial empire while trying to forget the scent of her auburn hair and the melody of her crystalline laugh. Why had he had this crazy idea to invite her to his wedding? Perhaps to prove to himself that he had definitively turned the page, or perhaps out of pure masochism. He was no longer sure. If you like this story so far, do not hesitate to leave a like to encourage the continuation. What do you think of the mystery surrounding Alexander's invitation to his ex? Leave me your impressions in the comments. The hours passed slowly, punctuated by the warm congratulations of the guests and the polite smiles that Alexander distributed with the ease of a man accustomed to social events. Caroline was radiant in her wedding dress designed by a great New York designer. Her blonde hair perfectly styled in a sophisticated updo, her family jewels sparkling under the lights. She was the very incarnation of American elegance, exactly the type of woman a man of his standing ought to marry. Yet, Alexander couldn't help but cast furtive glances toward the estate entrance, watching for a silhouette he would recognize among 1,000. "You seem distracted, my darling," murmured Caroline, slipping her arm under his. Her perfect smile did not falter for a second, despite the worry she perceived in his voice. "Everything is fine." Alexander forced himself to return her smile, gently caressing her powdered cheek. "Everything is perfectly fine, my beautiful. It's just the emotion of the moment." But deep down he knew he was lying. Nothing was fine. And this feeling of oppression squeezing his chest only intensified as the hour advanced. The civil ceremony took place without a hitch in the estate gardens under a particularly mild April sky. A prominent Manhattan judge, a longtime friend of the Sinclair family, gave a moving speech about love and commitment. Alexander answered yes in a firm voice when asked if he accepted to take Caroline as his wife, but his eyes continued to discreetly sweep the assembly of guests. Emily was still not there. Perhaps she had finally decided not to come, which would probably be better for everyone. Yet a part of him couldn't help but be disappointed. Applause rang out when the judge declared them husband and wife, and Alexander kissed Caroline with all the tenderness he could muster. The photographers immortalized this moment that celebrity magazines would rush to call the kiss of the year. But he was only thinking about one thing. Was this how a man was supposed to feel on his wedding day? This feeling of emptiness, as if he were playing a role in a play where he didn't control the script. The cocktail party that followed the ceremony had been in full swing for nearly an hour when Philip approached Alexander with his usual preoccupied look. "Sir, there is a delicate situation at the entrance. Miss Hayes has just arrived, but..." He hesitated, an unusual thing for this normally direct man. "But what, Philip?" "She did not come alone, sir. She is accompanied by a little girl who seems to be about 7 years old." Alexander felt the blood freeze in his veins. 7 years old. Exactly the age a child conceived during their last night together could have been. That night of passion and tears that had preceded their definitive breakup. "Let them in," he said in a voice he hoped was more assured than he felt. And Philip, not a word of this to anyone for the moment. His assistant nodded and quickly walked away, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts tumbling in his head like galloping horses. A 7-year-old girl, it could only be a coincidence, right? Emily would have told him otherwise. She had never spoken to him again after that fateful night. He had tried to contact her for months, but she had changed her number, moved, disappeared from his life as if she had never existed. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Alexander continued to smile and shake hands, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on this revelation that turned everything upside down. Caroline, fortunately, was monopolized by her friends who raved about her dress and jewels, which gave him a little respite to gather his thoughts. He sipped his champagne, trying to appear relaxed, but his hands trembled slightly, and he felt as though all the guests could read his thoughts on his face. That was when he saw her. Emily appeared on the estate terrace, and Alexander felt as if time stood still. She was even more beautiful than in his memories, her auburn hair cascading freely over her shoulders. Her simple yet elegant dress highlighted her graceful figure. But what truly took his breath away was the little girl holding her hand, a child with light brown hair and gray eyes, so similar to his own that he couldn't deny the obvious truth that struck him like a sledgehammer. The little girl was his spitting image at the same age, the same fine features, the same piercing gaze, the same way of tilting her head slightly when she observed something that intrigued her. Alexander felt his legs give way beneath him and had to discreetly lean against a column so as not to sway. How was it possible? How could Emily have hidden the existence of his own daughter from him for all these years? Emily scanned the crowd until her eyes met his. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, they stared at each other through the crowd of guests. 8 years of silence and unspoken words weighing between them like a lead weight. She was pale, visibly as moved as he was, but there was a determination in her gaze that he had not known before. The little girl, for her part, looked around with curiosity, impressed by the splendor of the estate and the elegance of the guests. "Mommy, is this really where Daddy is getting married?" asked the child in a clear voice that carried to Alexander's ears despite the hubbub of conversations. Emily leaned toward her and whispered something in her ear. But Alexander had heard what he needed to hear. "Daddy!" This little girl was talking about him as her father, which meant that Emily had told her the truth about her origins. But then, why had she come today? What did she want from him after all these years of silence? He had to go talk to her, to understand what was happening, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. How could he explain to Caroline, on the very day of their wedding, that he might have a 7-year-old daughter with his ex-fiancée? How could he justify the fact that he had invited that same ex-fiancée to their wedding without telling her? He was trapped by his own impulsivity, and the consequences of his actions suddenly appeared to him in all their cruelty. "Alexander, who is that woman looking at you like that?" Caroline's voice brought him brutally back to reality. His new wife stood next to him, her sharp gaze fixed on Emily and the little girl. There was a hint of jealousy in her voice that she tried to conceal under a veneer of social politeness, but Alexander knew her well enough to detect the signs of her growing annoyance. "She is an old acquaintance," he answered evasively, striving to keep a neutral tone. "I didn't think she would come." Caroline raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow, her feminine instinct whispering to her that this old acquaintance meant much more than Alexander was willing to admit. "And the little girl, she looks troublingly like you, don't you think?" Alexander felt sweat bead on his forehead. His wife was far from naive, and he realized he wouldn't be able to hide the truth from her for very long. Before he could answer, Emily walked toward them, still holding her daughter's hand. Each of her steps seemed to resonate in Alexander's head like the strike of a gong, announcing the inevitable confrontation he dreaded so much. The guests around them were beginning to notice the palpable tension settling in, and some conversations became more discreet, glances more curious. "Hello, Alexander," said Emily in a steady voice as she reached them. "Congratulations on your wedding." Her tone was polite but distant, the kind one uses with a perfect stranger. Only the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her emotion. Alexander opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. He was hypnotized by this woman he had loved more than anything in the world, and who now stood before him with their daughter, shattering the entire existence he had built for himself in an instant. "Hello," he finally managed to articulate. I'm glad you could come." A lie. He was not glad. He was terrified, devastated, overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions he couldn't untangle. Caroline moved closer to him, her arms slipping possessively around his, marking her territory with the subtlety of a lioness protecting her offspring. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand toward Emily. "I am Caroline Sterling, Alexander's wife." The emphasis she placed on the word wife left no doubt about her intentions. Emily politely shook the extended hand, her smile not wavering for a second. "Emily Hayes, delighted to meet you, Mrs. Sterling. Please allow me to introduce my daughter, Chloe." The little girl performed a perfect curtsy, as she had undoubtedly been taught, and gave Caroline a radiant smile. "Hello, ma'am. Mommy told me you were very beautiful, and it's true." The child's innocence contrasted cruelly with the electric tension reigning between the adults. Caroline couldn't help but smile despite herself, touched by the little girl's spontaneity. But Alexander saw that her gaze remained suspicious. "How old are you, Chloe?" asked Caroline with forced sweetness. "I am 7.5, ma'am. I will be 8 in December." Alexander closed his eyes for a second. December. Exactly 9 months. After that night in March when they had made love one last time before separating forever. The math was unforgiving, and there was no longer any possible doubt about the paternity of this child. The silence that followed was deafening. Caroline, who was not born yesterday, was visibly beginning to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Her gaze went from Alexander to Emily, then from Emily to Chloe, and he could almost see the gears of her mind working at full speed. When she brought her attention back to her husband, there was a glacial gleam in her eyes that he had never seen before. "Alexander, could you give me a moment in private?" she asked in a dangerously calm voice. It wasn't really a question, more of a disguised order, and they both knew it. Alexander nodded, unable to refuse, even though he knew this conversation would probably be one of the most difficult of his life. "Emily, if you'll excuse us for a few minutes," he said, turning to his ex-fiancée. "Perhaps we could speak later." Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the delicate situation in which she had placed them by her mere presence. "Of course. Chloe and I will visit the gardens in the meantime. They are magnificent." She took her daughter's hand and walked away with elegance, leaving behind a trail of perfume that instantly took Alexander 8 years back in time. Caroline waited until she was out of earshot before turning to her husband, her mask of social politeness dropping all at once. "Don't tell me you didn't know," she hissed through her teeth, her blue eyes flashing. "That little girl is your spitting image, Alexander. How could you hide such a thing from me on our wedding day?" Her voice was low but vibrating with anger, and Alexander realized he had never seen his wife in such a state. "I truly didn't know, Caroline," he replied in a hushed voice. "I swear to you I didn't know. If I had known Emily was pregnant..." He didn't finish his sentence, unable to say what he would have done in that case. Would he have married Emily? Would he have given up Caroline? These questions tortured him, but it was too late now to answer them. "Why did you invite her?" asked Caroline. And this time, her voice broke slightly. "Why did you invite your ex-fiancé to our wedding without even telling me? Did you intend to humiliate me in front of all the New York elite?" Tears shined in her eyes, and Alexander felt his heart clench. Whatever the complexity of his feelings, Caroline did not deserve this. She was a good, generous, and loving woman, and she didn't deserve to suffer because of his past mistakes. "That was not my intention," he said, trying to take her hands in his, but she pulled away sharply. I don't know what I wanted, Caroline. Maybe to prove to myself that I had moved on. Maybe to have a conversation with her to definitively close that chapter of my life. I had no idea she would come with. He glanced toward the gardens where Emily and Chloe were admiring the estate's roses. With your daughter, finished Caroline in a bitter voice. A daughter whose existence you were ignorant of until today. How is that possible, Alexander? How can a woman hide from a man that he has a child for 7 years? Her question was legitimate, and Alexander had been asking himself the same thing since he first saw Chloe. Why hadn't Emily told him anything? What could have pushed her to raise their daughter alone for all these years? I don't know, he confessed. But I fully intend to find out. Caroline, I know all this is terrible for you, for us, but I can't act as if this child doesn't exist now that I know she is here. She's my daughter. The words left his mouth before he could hold them back, and he immediately saw the effect they produced on his wife. She paled, swayed slightly, and had to lean against the stone wall so as not to fall. Your daughter, she repeated as if the words were poison in her mouth. We have been married for 3 hours, Alexander, and you are already telling me you have a daughter with another woman. How do you want me to react? How do you want us to build our future together with this secret between us? Her voice was now heavy with sobs she desperately tried to repress. Aware that all the guests could observe them, Alexander wanted to take her in his arms, reassure her, promise her that nothing would change between them. But he knew it would be a lie. Everything had changed the moment he laid eyes on Chloe. This little girl was his flesh and blood, and he could never act as if she didn't exist. At the same time, he loved Caroline, or at least he believed he loved her. And he didn't want their marriage to end before it had even begun. We will find a solution, he finally said, although he had no idea what that solution might look like. Just let me talk to Emily, understand why she did this. And then we'll see how to handle the situation. Caroline looked at him for a long time, her eyes scanning his face as if she were trying to read her future there. Very well, she finally said. But Alexander, know one thing. I will not share my husband with the ghost of his past. Whether that woman is the mother of your daughter or not, you are going to have to make a choice. It's her or me, but not both. With these words, she turned on her heels and went back to the guests, instantly putting her mask of the radiant young bride back on. Alexander watched her walk away, wondering if he hadn't just lost his wife on the very day of his wedding. He remained alone for a few minutes, trying to gather his thoughts and decide on the course of action. Around him, the party was in full swing. Guests laughed, drank champagne, danced on the terrace to the sound of the orchestra he had specially brought in from Boston. No one seemed to have noticed the drama that had just played out, or at least they pretended not to preserve appearances. In the world Alexander moved in, scandals had to remain secret. Emotions contained, facades maintained at all costs. He finally headed toward the gardens, his heart beating faster and faster as he got closer to Emily and Chloe. He found them near the water lily pond, the little girl amusing herself by counting the goldfish while her mother pensively watched the water sparkling under the late afternoon sun. Emily didn't turn around when he approached, but he saw her shoulders stiffen slightly, betraying her awareness of his presence. "Hello, Daddy," Chloe exclaimed joyfully upon seeing him. And those two simple words had the effect of a bomb in Alexander's heart. Daddy! His own daughter was calling him Daddy, even though they were meeting for the first time. How was this possible? What exactly had Emily told her about him? What exactly had Emily told her about him? "Hello, Chloe," he answered in a soft voice, crouching down to her level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. This child was a perfect mix of him and Emily, with her light brown hair leaning toward auburn, her sparkling gray-green eyes, her mischievous smile that reminded him so much of his own childhood. "You look pretty in your blue dress." Chloe beamed at the compliment and twirled her dress coquettishly. "Mommy bought it specially for me to come see you. She said it was a very important day and that I had to be beautiful." Alexander cast a glance at Emily, who had finally deigned to turn toward them. Her face was impassive, but there was a depth of emotion in her green eyes that he couldn't decipher. "Chloe, would you like to go see the swans on the pond?" Emily asked gently. "But don't get too close to the edge, okay?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically and skipped away, leaving her parents face to face for the first time in 8 years. The silence that settled between them was heavy with so many unspoken words. Silent reproaches, unanswered questions that Alexander wondered where to begin. Why? He finally managed to articulate, this simple word summarizing all his interrogations. Why didn't you tell me anything? Why raise our daughter alone? Why come today on the day of my wedding? Emily perfectly understood the meaning of his question, and her face hardened slightly. Because you made it very clear to me that you never wanted to see me again, she replied in a calm but reproach-filled voice. Because you accused me of terrible things that night, Alexander. Because you refused to listen to me when I tried to explain the truth to you. So, when I discovered I was pregnant, I preferred to raise our daughter far away from you rather than risk her suffering your contempt. Alexander felt like a dagger had pierced his chest. That night in March, 8 years earlier, came back to haunt him with painful precision. They had argued over a photo in a celebrity magazine, a photo showing Emily in the arms of another man at a charity gala. Alexander, blinded by jealousy and pride, had refused to listen to her explanations, convinced she was cheating on him. They had made love one last time, in a mix of passion and despair. Then she left the next morning without a word, taking all his hopes for happiness with her. You should have told me about Chloe, he insisted. Whatever our differences, I had the right to know I had a daughter. Emily let out a bitter laugh that squeezed his heart. Oh, really? And what would you have done, Alexander? Would you have married me out of duty? Would you have given up your precious career, your ambitions, your lifestyle to play daddy with a woman you accused of infidelity? No, I don't think so. I preferred to let you live your life and build mine with our daughter. And what did you tell her about me? He asked, looking at Chloe, who was now amusing herself feeding the ducks with breadcrumbs she had found. She called me daddy as if she had known me forever. Emily followed his gaze, and her expression softened as she watched their daughter. I told her the truth, Alexander. That her daddy was a very important, very busy man who couldn't live with us, but who loved her very much. I showed her your photos in the newspapers. I talked to her about your business successes. I never wanted her to hate you or think you had willingly abandoned her. This revelation overwhelmed Alexander more than he expected. Despite their painful breakup, Emily had preserved his image for their daughter, allowing her to grow up loving a father she had never met. Then why now? He asked. Why come today, on my wedding day? What do you expect from me, Emily? There was a plea in his voice that he didn't even try to hide. He needed to understand, to make sense of this situation that was overturning everything he thought he knew about his life. Emily took a deep breath before answering, as if gathering her courage to say something difficult. Because Chloe is sick, Alexander. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and I am not a match. The doctors say her chances of finding a compatible donor increase considerably if a close family member can be tested. Her voice broke on the last words, and Alexander saw tears shining in her green eyes. The world collapsed around him. His daughter, this magnificent child he had barely just discovered, was sick, potentially dying. And Emily had come to see him not to turn his life upside down or take revenge for their old wounds, but to save their child. Everything suddenly made a different kind of sense. Her presence at the wedding, her determination despite the embarrassing situation, the courage she must have gathered to come ask him for help. What illness? He managed to articulate, his voice now just a whisper. Leukemia, Emily replied, discreetly wiping her eyes. Diagnosed 6 months ago. She responded well to chemotherapy, but the doctors say a transplant is necessary to ensure her complete recovery. I have exhausted all the donor banks in America and in Europe. You are her last hope, Alexander. Alexander felt his legs buckle beneath him and had to sit down on the stone bench bordering the pond. His daughter was sick, seriously sick, and he hadn't even known. While he was building his financial empire and preparing his dream wedding, his child was fighting cancer. Guilt washed over him like a crashing wave, mixed with a terror he had never felt before. He was a man used to controlling every aspect of his life, but here, Faced with this revelation, he felt completely powerless. "Since when have you known?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Emily sat down next to him, maintaining a respectable distance but close enough for him to smell the familiar scent of her skin. "The diagnosis came down last October. At first, I hoped a compatible donor would present themselves. But as the months went by," she shrugged with a resignation that broke his heart. "The doctors insisted that I contact the biological father. I resisted as long as possible, Alexander, but I cannot let our daughter die out of pride." The word "die" resonated in Alexander's mind like a knell. He looked at Chloe, who was laughing as she saw a swan approaching the edge of the pond, so full of life and carefree spirit that it was impossible to imagine she was sick. "She doesn't know how serious it is, does she?" Emily shook her head. "I told her she was a little sick and that she had to take medicine to get better. But she doesn't know all the details. She has already suffered enough with the chemotherapy. I will take the test," Alexander said without a second of hesitation. "First thing tomorrow morning?" "No, tonight if necessary." "How do we do it? Who do I contact?" For the first time since she had arrived, Emily smiled. A real smile that lit up her face and reminded Alexander why he had fallen in love with her years ago. "Thank you," she murmured. "I knew that despite everything that happened between us, you couldn't refuse to help Chloe." "She is my daughter," he replied simply, and those 4 words contained all the determination in the world. "Even if I am only just learning it, she is my daughter, and I will do everything in my power to save her." He turned to Emily, meeting her gaze for the first time since they had started talking. "Why did you wait until today? You could have come to see me earlier. Explain the situation to me." Emily looked away, embarrassed. I tried several times to get in touch with you. I called your office, but your assistant told me you were in meetings or traveling. I wrote letters that I never sent. And then I saw the announcement of your wedding in the newspapers, and I thought that if you invited me, maybe it was a sign that you were ready to listen to me." She let out a small, nervous laugh. "I didn't expect you to actually do it." "Me neither," Alexander confessed. "I don't even know why I did it. Maybe to prove to myself I had moved on, or maybe..." He didn't finish his sentence, unable to admit that perhaps, deep down, he was hoping to see her again. "In any case, I am glad you came. Even if the circumstances are..." He searched for his words. "Complicated." Chloe came running back toward them, her cheeks pink from the cool evening air. "Mommy, Daddy, did you see the swans? They are magnificent. And there are little babies too." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the gravity of the situation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. This child was a ray of sunshine, and the idea that she could be in danger revolted him. "Yes, my darling, we saw them," replied Emily, stroking her daughter's hair. "Tell me, would you like to spend a little time with Daddy? Maybe you two could get to know each other." Chloe nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with excitement. "Oh yes, can you tell me about your work, Daddy? Mommy says you build very important things." Alexander felt his heart squeeze. This little girl looked at him with such admiration and unconditional love that he was deeply moved. How could he have missed out on all of this? How could he have lived 7 years without knowing of the existence of this wonderful being who was his own blood? "Of course, sweetheart," he answered, kneeling in front of her. "But first, tell me what you like to do. What are your favorite games? What is your favorite color?" Chloe launched into enthusiastic babble, telling him that she loved going to the movies, taking piano lessons, reading princess stories but also pirate adventures, and that her favorite color was purple, like her doll's eyes. While he listened to his daughter, Alexander felt a presence behind him. He turned around and saw Philip approaching with his usual grave look. "Sir, forgive me for disturbing you, but Mrs. Sterling is asking for you. The guests are starting to ask questions about your absence." The brutal return to reality hit Alexander like a slap. His wedding, Caroline, his guests, his new life waiting for him in the estate. How was he going to reconcile all of that with this discovery that changed everything? "I'll be there in a few minutes, Philip," he replied. His assistant nodded and walked away discreetly. But Alexander saw that he had noticed the striking resemblance between him and Chloe. Philip was an intelligent and discreet man who had already handled many delicate situations for his boss. But this one surpassed anything they had ever experienced before. "I have to return to my guests," he told Emily as he stood up. "But we must talk, the two of us. Really talk about Chloe, her treatment, what we are going to do now." Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the impossible situation he found himself in. "Of course. We can leave now if you prefer. I didn't want to disrupt your evening more than necessary." "No," said Alexander more firmly than he intended. "No, don't leave. Not yet. Chloe, would you like to see the inside of the estate? There are very beautiful paintings and even a library with old books." The little girl's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, are there history books?" "Plenty, I promise," Alexander said. "Philip will show you around while I attend to my guests, and then we will all have dinner together. Does that work for you?" Emily seemed to hesitate. "Alexander, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Your wife didn't seem very happy to see us, and I can understand her. It is your wedding day after all." But Alexander had made his decision. He had just discovered he had a daughter, that this daughter was sick, and there was no way she was leaving without him having had the time to get to know her better. "Caroline will understand," he said, hoping it was true. "Philip, could you please ask them to set 2 extra places for dinner? And please show Miss Chloe around the estate, she loves stories." His assistant nodded without asking questions, long accustomed to his boss's unexpected requests. "Of course, sir. Miss Chloe, if you will follow me." Chloe took Philip's extended hand with confidence, then turned back to Alexander. "Will you come find us soon, Daddy?" That innocent question brought a lump to his throat. "Yes, my darling, very soon. In the meantime, be good for Mr. Philip." He watched his daughter walk away toward the grand house, her small hand in his assistant's, and had the surreal impression of living a waking dream. "Alexander," Emily said softly when they were alone, "I know this is all huge for you. If you need time to think, to digest all of this, I can understand. Chloe and I can go back to New York and return when you are ready to—" "No," he interrupted her. "No, Emily. I have already lost 7 years of my daughter's life. I don't want to lose one more minute." He headed toward the reception with a determined step, Emily at his side. The time had come to face Caroline and his guests, to explain to them a situation he still didn't completely understand himself. But one thing was certain. He would not deny his daughter. Whatever the consequences on his marital and social life might be, the party was still in full swing when they arrived on the terrace. The orchestra was playing a classic waltz, and several couples were dancing under the string lights that were beginning to twinkle in the nascent twilight. Alexander looked around for Caroline and found her deep in conversation with her mother and some friends, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked up at him as he approached, and he immediately saw that she had been crying despite her carefully touched-up makeup. "Ladies, could you excuse us for a moment?" he asked politely. "I would like to speak to my wife in private." Caroline's friends exchanged knowing glances but tactfully moved away, leaving the newlyweds face to face. Caroline emptied her glass of champagne in one gulp before looking him straight in the eyes. "So," she simply said, "what did she tell you to justify hiding your daughter's existence for 7 years?" Her voice was calm, too calm, and Alexander recognized the warning signs of one of her cold anxiety, the kind that was far more formidable than her outbursts. "She didn't hide it out of malice, Caroline. He searched for his words, aware that whatever he said could be used against him. "Our breakup went very badly. I said terrible things. I refused to listen to her. When she found out she was pregnant, she preferred to raise our daughter alone rather than risk me rejecting her." Caroline let out a joyless laugh. "How touching. And naturally, you excuse her. You excuse the fact that she deprived you of your daughter, and that your daughter was deprived of her father. But tell me, Alexander, why did she come today? What does she want?" His wife's perceptiveness no longer surprised him. Caroline had always had an infallible instinct for guessing people's hidden motives. "Chloe is sick," he confessed, and he immediately saw Caroline's expression change. "She has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. Emily is not a match, and she hopes that I will be." The silence that followed this revelation was heavy. Caroline stared at him for a long time, and he saw a succession of emotions cross her face. Surprise, compassion, but also a painful resignation. "Your daughter is dying," she finally said. "And it wasn't a question but an observation. And your ex-fiancé came to ask you to save her on the day of your wedding to another woman." She shook her head as if she couldn't believe the situation. "It sounds like the script of a bad melodrama. Caroline, I know all this is incredibly difficult for you, for us, but this child is your daughter," she finished. "Yes, Alexander, I understood. Your daughter whom you didn't know an hour ago and for whom you are now ready to append our marriage." There was a bitterness in her voice he had never heard before. And he realized he was in the process of losing his wife on the very day of their union. "That's not what I want," he protested. "I want our marriage to work, Caroline. But I can't ignore Chloe's existence now that I know she's here. And I can't let her die if I have the power to save her." Caroline looked at him for a long time, and he saw tears shining in her blue eyes. "I know," she said softly. "And that is exactly why I'm losing you, isn't it? Because you are a good man, Alexander. A man who could never abandon his daughter, even a daughter he doesn't know. And I'm just a wife of a few hours who suddenly finds herself competing with a sick child and the love of your life." "Emily is not the love of my life," Alexander protested. But even to his own ears, those words rang false. "It's you I married, Caroline. It's you I love." Caroline gave a sad smile that broke his heart. "You think you love me, Alexander? But look at yourself since she arrived. Your eyes are shining in a way I have never seen. That woman and that child awakened something in you that I have never managed to touch." He wanted to protest, but deep down he knew she was right. Since he had seen Emily and Chloe, he felt alive in a way he had forgotten, as if a part of him that had lain dormant for 8 years had suddenly woken up. It didn't mean he didn't love Caroline, but he was forced to admit that their feelings had never had that burning intensity he had known with Emily. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, at a loss. "Tell me what you expect of me, Caroline, and I will do it." She looked at him with infinite sadness, and he understood she had already made her decision. "What I want you to take the compatibility test for your daughter. I want you to save her if you can. And I want you to be honest with yourself about what you truly feel for her mother. And us?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "What is going to happen to us?" Caroline took his hands in hers, her fingers caressing the wedding ring he had been wearing for only a few hours. "I don't know, Alexander. Maybe we will manage to overcome all of this. Maybe you will choose your new family. Or maybe we will discover that our marriage was a mistake from the beginning." Those words hit him like a dagger, but he couldn't deny them. Perhaps their marriage was indeed a mistake. Perhaps he had married Caroline because she represented stability, respectability, everything a man of his standing was supposed to desire, rather than out of true love. This thought terrified him, but he could no longer ignore it. "I don't want to lose you," he said sincerely. Caroline smiled through her tears. "I don't want to lose you either. But I also don't want a husband who stays with me out of duty or habit. If we are to be together, Alexander, it must be because we truly love each other, not because we signed some papers this morning." The orchestra started a new melody, softer, more melancholic. Around them, the guests continued to celebrate, unaware of the drama playing out between the newlyweds. Alexander wanted to stop time, to go back a few hours before Emily and Chloe had burst into his life to turn everything upside down. But he knew it was impossible. He could no longer pretend his daughter didn't exist. "Mr. Sterling?" Philip's voice made him jump. His assistant stood a few meters away from them, accompanied by Chloe, who held a book in her hand, her eyes shining with excitement. "Miss Chloe would like to show you something she found in the library." Alexander exchanged a look with Caroline, who nodded imperceptibly. Whatever happened between them, He couldn't make this innocent child pay for the complications of their adult lives. "What did you find, sweetie?" asked Alexander, kneeling before his daughter. Chloe handed him the book with pride. "It's a very old storybook in English. Mr. Phillips says it is over 100 years old, and look. There are magnificent drawings." She opened the book to an illustrated page showing a princess in a castle. And Alexander recognized one of the works from the Sinclair family's collection. "It is very beautiful indeed," he said, admiring the delicate illuminations. "Do you know how to read Old English?" Chloe shook her head with regret. "No, the words are too difficult. But Mommy is teaching me modern English at home. She says it's important to know how to read well." Alexander glanced at Caroline, who was observing the scene with an indecipherable expression. "Hello, little one," Caroline suddenly said, approaching Chloe. "How was your tour of the estate?" The little girl raised her big gray eyes to her, a bit intimidated by the elegant young woman. "Very good, ma'am. Your house is very beautiful. It's truly a princess castle." Despite the tension of the situation, Caroline couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, my darling. And tell me, are you hungry? Dinner will be served soon." Alexander was touched to see his wife making an effort to be kind to Chloe despite the circumstances. Whatever the outcome of their marital crisis, Caroline remained a classy woman who would never make a child pay for the adult's mistakes. "Oh yes, I'm very hungry," exclaimed Chloe. "And Mommy too. She hasn't eaten anything since this morning. She was so nervous to come see you." This innocent revelation reminded Alexander that Emily was probably also experiencing this situation very badly. She had to have gathered immense courage to come see him on his wedding day, knowing she risked a poor reception. All of this in the hope of saving their daughter. He realized he hadn't even thought to ask her how she was doing, if she needed financial help for Chloe's care, if she was alone in facing this ordeal. "Where is Mommy, by the way?" he asked Chloe. "She stayed in the library," replied the little girl. She was looking at the books, but she looked sad. "I think she was crying a little." This information squeezed Alexander's heart. Emily was crying alone in the library while he discussed things with his wife on the terrace. He had to go see her, make sure she was okay. "Philip, could you accompany Chloe to the dining room and have them serve her a snack while waiting for dinner?" he asked. "I would like to speak to her mommy." His assistant nodded and held out his hand to the little girl. "Come along, Miss Chloe. I believe the cooks have prepared some fancy pastries. And maybe even some hot chocolate if you are good." Chloe clapped her hands with excitement and followed Philip without protesting, carrying her precious book. When she was out of earshot, Caroline turned to Alexander. "Go see her," she simply said. "She must be devastated. That poor woman. I'll go take care of our guests. One of us has to play the role of host." There was a resignation in her voice that hurt Alexander, but also a generosity that reminded him why he had wanted to marry her. "Caroline," he began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "Go, Alexander. We will have our whole lives to talk about us. That woman and that child need you right now." She kissed him quickly on the cheek. A kiss light as a feather, then returned to their guests. With her perfectly restored facade smile, Alexander headed toward the library with a beating heart. He found Emily standing in front of the large window overlooking the gardens, her arms crossed over her chest in a defensive posture he knew well. She didn't turn around when he entered, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly. "Chloe told me you were sad," he said softly. "Are you okay?" "How do you expect me to be okay, Alexander?" she replied without turning around. "I just crashed your new life on your wedding day to tell you that we have a daughter together and that she is dying. Your wife hates me. Your guests look at me like an intruder. And you..." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "And you? You look completely lost." He approached her slowly, like one approaches an injured animal. "I am lost, it's true. But not for the reasons you think." She finally turned around, and he saw that she had indeed been crying. Her green eyes were reddened, her makeup slightly smudged despite her efforts to touch it up. She was still beautiful, terribly beautiful. and he felt the urge to take her in his arms to console her as he had done so many times in the past. "I am lost because everything I believed in just collapsed in a few hours," he continued. "I thought I had built a perfect, stable, predictable life. And suddenly, you arrive with our daughter, and everything I thought was important seems futile. My business, my marriage, my reputation, none of that matters in the face of the fact that Chloe is sick." Emily looked at him for a long time, trying to decipher his feelings. "I am sorry, Alexander. Sorry to burst into your life like this, to turn everything upside down. If I had the choice..." "You did the right thing," he interrupted. "You did the right thing by coming. I have the right to know my daughter, and she has the right to have a father. Even if I'm discovering all this 8 years late." 8.5 years, Emily automatically corrected. And they both smiled despite the gravity of the situation. This little moment of levity reminded him of the time when they were happy together. When they could laugh about anything and nothing. When the future seemed radiant and full of promise to them. "Tell me about her illness," he asked, settling into one of the library's leather armchairs. "I want to know everything. How long has she been sick? How did you find out? What are the treatments, the prognosis?" Emily sat opposite him, and for the next half hour she told him everything. The first symptoms she had blamed on school fatigue. The exams that had revealed the horrible truth. The nights spent at the hospital while Chloe underwent her chemotherapy. The terror of losing her that woke her up every night. Alexander listened in silence, his heart aching for everything Emily had to endure alone. How had she found the strength to keep working, to keep smiling for their daughter, to make her believe everything would be fine? He admired her strength, her determination, but he was also consumed by guilt for not having been there to support them. "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" he asked when she had finished. "Right from the diagnosis, you should have called me. No matter what happened between us, Emily, this is about our daughter's life." She lowered her eyes, visibly embarrassed. "I tried, Alexander, I really did. But every time I tried to call you, I remembered that night. Your accusations. The way you looked at me when you told me you never wanted to see me again. I was angry," he said weakly. "I was jealous and proud, and I said things I didn't really mean." Emily let out a bitter smile. "You thought I was cheating on you with Marcus Bradley. You refused to listen to my explanations. You accused me of being a liar and a manipulator. And when I tried to tell you that that photo showed nothing more than a polite dance at a charity gala, you told me you didn't want to hear my lies anymore." Alexander closed his eyes, recalling that terrible night when his jealousy had destroyed their love. He had seen red upon discovering that photo of Emily in the arms of Marcus Bradley, the man he had hated since their university years and who was now his direct competitor in business. He hadn't wanted to hear that it was just a protocol dance, that the photographer had caught the only moment they had been together the entire evening. His wounded pride and his sickly jealousy had overpowered his reason. "I discovered the truth a few months later," he confessed in a hoarse voice. "Marcus himself told me, laughing, that the photo had been taken at a moment when protocol obliged him to dance with all the important women of the evening. He found it amusing that it might have caused problems between us. The memory of that late revelation still hurt him. He had destroyed their love for nothing, out of pure stupidity and masculine pride. But you never contacted me to apologize," said Emily in a soft voice but full of reproach. "You preferred to keep your pride rather than admit you were wrong." Alexander opened his eyes and met her gaze. "I tried," he said. "God knows I tried, Emily. But you had disappeared. You had moved, changed your number, left your job. No one knew where you had gone. I even hired a private investigator to find you. But you seem to have erased all traces of your existence." This revelation surprised Emily. "You searched for me for months," Alexander confirmed. "I was going crazy. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I was obsessed with the idea of finding you to ask for your forgiveness. My loved ones eventually convinced me that it was better for me to stop, to turn the page and rebuild my life." He let out a bitter laugh. "Ironic, isn't it? The moment I gave up my search, you discovered you were pregnant with my daughter. Emily remained silent for a long moment, digesting this information. "I didn't know," she finally murmured. "I thought you were relieved to see me go, that you had quickly found someone else." "It took me 6 years to agree to go out with another woman," Alexander confessed. "And even then, my relationship with Caroline is more a marriage of reason than a great passion. My parents and hers had wanted this union for a long time." "You don't love her?" asked Emily, and there was something in her voice he couldn't identify. Curiosity? Hope? "I thought I loved her," he answered honestly. "Or rather, I convinced myself that what I felt for her was love. Caroline is a wonderful, intelligent, elegant woman. She would make a perfect wife for any man, but, encouraged Emily. Alexander looked her straight in the eyes before answering, "But she isn't you. She doesn't make me laugh the way you made me laugh. She doesn't understand me with a single glance. She doesn't make me want to conquer the world just to lay it at her feet." His voice softened. "She doesn't make me vibrate the way you did." The silence that followed this confession was charged with electricity. Emily had blushed and looked away, visibly moved by his words. "Alexander," she said finally, "we cannot go back. Too many things have happened. Too much water has passed under the bridge. You are married now, and—" She hesitated. "I have learned to live without you." "Do you have someone in your life?" he asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. Emily shook her head. "No, how could I? Between work, Chloe, and now her illness, I haven't had the time or the energy for romantic relationships. And anyway, how do you explain to a man that my daughter is the child of one of the most prominent bachelors in America? Most would have run away." "You should have told me about Chloe right when she was born," Alexander insisted. "Regardless of our personal problems, I had the right to know my child, and she had the right to know her father." "You are right," Emily admitted. "I know that now. But at the time I was young, hurt, terrified at the idea of raising a child alone. I was only 26 years old, Alexander. I made the decision that seemed best to me in the moment." Before Alexander could answer, the library door opened and Chloe came running in, followed by Philip, who seemed slightly out of breath. "Mommy, Daddy, you have to come see. There are musicians playing the harp. And Mrs. Caroline told me I could ask them to play my favorite song." The little girl's enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the gravity of their conversation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. "What is your favorite song, sweetie?" he asked, standing up to approach his daughter. "Moon River!" exclaimed Chloe. "Mommy sings it to me every night before going to sleep. It's our special song." Alexander glanced at Emily, who had blushed. That song had been their special song too. The one they listened to embracing in their small apartment in Greenwich Village when they were young and carefree. "That is a very beautiful song," he said in a moved voice. "I am sure the musicians will be delighted to play it for you." He took Chloe's hand in his, still marveling at the softness of this little hand that was a perfect mix of his and Emily's. "But first, what would you say to meeting some of my friends? There are some very interesting people here tonight." All three returned to the terrace where the reception was in full swing. Alexander proudly introduced Chloe to a few hand-picked guests, ones he knew were discreet enough not to spread gossip throughout New York the very next day. The little girl charmed everyone with her spontaneity and intelligence, asking the ambassadors relevant questions about their countries, complimenting the ladies on their dresses, listening with fascination to the stories told by the captains of industry. Caroline observed the scene from afar, and Alexander saw she was torn between admiration for this exceptional child and the pain of seeing her husband radiate with paternal pride for another woman's daughter. When their eyes met, she gave him a sad but sincere smile, and he understood she was doing her best to accept a situation that completely overwhelmed her. Dinner was served in the estate's grand dining room, a magnificent room with its 18th century woodwork and crystal chandeliers. Alexander had seated Emily and Chloe at his table despite the surprised looks of some guests who wondered who these mysterious last-minute diners were. Caroline had insisted that Chloe be seated between her and Alexander, and she spent the evening attending to the little girl with a kindness that deeply touched Alexander. "Mrs. Caroline," said Chloe while enjoying her dessert, "your house is truly magical. It's like in the storybooks. You must feel like a real princess here." Caroline smiled, for the first time sincerely since Emily's arrival. "Thank you, my darling. And you, where do you live with your mommy?" "We have a small apartment in New York," replied Chloe. "It's not as big as your house, but mommy says it's our cozy little nest, and we have a terrace with flowers." "That must be very pretty," politely said Caroline. "And what do you like to do when you're not at school?" "I like to draw, play the piano, read stories, and I really like cooking with mommy. She teaches me how to make cakes." Chloe turned to Alexander. "Daddy, do you know how to cook?" His daughter's innocent question made Alexander smile. "Not very well, I'm afraid. I am better at ordering in restaurants than preparing meals." "I could teach you," Chloe proposed with enthusiasm. "Mommy says I'm good at cookies." "We could make cookies together." The idea of cooking with his daughter filled Alexander with a joy he had never felt before. "That would be wonderful, sweetie. I would very much like to learn how to make cookies with you." The evening continued in a strange atmosphere, a mix of joy and tension. The guests were having fun, dancing, celebrating what was supposed to be one of the best days of Alexander's life. But he couldn't stop thinking that this day marked, on the contrary, perhaps the end of an era. Chloe had eventually fallen asleep on a sofa in the lounge, exhausted by all the emotions of the day, and Emily watched over her tenderly. "She is adorable," said Caroline, approaching Emily. The two women found themselves alone for the first time that evening, Alexander having gone to greet some guests who were taking their leave. "You have done a very good job with her." Emily looked up at her rival, surprised by the sincerity of her tone. "Thank you," she simply said. "She is the light of my life, it shows," replied Caroline. "She speaks of you with such love and admiration. You must be an extraordinary mother." An awkward silence settled between them, each not knowing how to broach the delicate situation in which they found themselves. It was finally Caroline who broke the silence. "May I ask you an indiscreet question?" Emily nodded. "Are you still in love with him?" The direct question surprised Emily, who hadn't expected such frankness. "It's complicated," she finally replied. "Alexander and I shared something very strong in the past, but it is in the past. I didn't come here to win anyone back, Mrs. Sterling. I came to save my daughter." "Our daughter?" gently corrected Caroline. "She is his daughter too now." "Yes," admitted Emily. "And I know that changes everything for you. I am sorry to crash into your life like this on your wedding day. If I had had the choice—" "You did the right thing," Caroline interrupted, repeating the words Alexander had spoken earlier. "This little girl needs her father, and he needs to know his daughter, even if it terribly complicates all of our lives." Emily studied Caroline's face, trying to understand this woman who showed such elegance in adversity. "Do you truly love him?" she asked, and it wasn't a question. Caroline gave a sad smile. "Yes, I love him. But I am beginning to realize that perhaps he does not love me in the same way. Or in any case, not like he loved you." This confession stunned Emily, who hadn't imagined Alexander's wife could be so lucid about the situation. "I don't want to destroy your marriage," she said sincerely. "I just want Chloe to have a chance to survive. And if that means Alexander must be a part of her life, then so be it. But I'm not trying to reconnect with him. Too many things have changed." Caroline looked at her for a long time, trying to detect the sincerity of her words. "Do you really mean what you say?" "Yes," answered Emily firmly. "I am no longer the naive young woman from before. I have learned to live alone, to be strong for my daughter. I no longer need someone to save me." Alexander chose that moment to return to them, and he immediately felt the tension reigning between the two women. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking alternately at his wife and his ex-fiancé. "Very well," replied Caroline, standing up. Emily and I were getting to know each other. She has a remarkable daughter. Alexander, you can be proud." With those words, she walked away, leaving Alexander perplexed by what had just happened. "What did you talk about?" he asked Emily. "About Chloe, about the situation, about what we are going to do now." Emily tenderly stroked her sleeping daughter's hair. "Your wife is a good person, Alexander. She doesn't deserve to suffer because of our past mistakes." Alexander sat next to her, contemplating Chloe's peaceful face. "What are we going to do, Emily? How are we going to manage all of this?" "Step by step," she answered practically. "First, you take the compatibility test. Then we see if you can help Chloe, and after that," she shrugged. "After that, we'll improvise. The important thing is that she gets well. The rest we'll deal with later." Alexander nodded, once again admiring Emily's strength and pragmatism. She had always had this ability to focus on the essential when the situation became critical. "I will call my doctor first thing tomorrow morning," he promised. "No, I'm going to call him tonight. I want to take this test as quickly as possible." "Alexander," Emily said softly, "you need to know something. Even if you are a match, there is no guarantee that the transplant will work. The doctors speak of a 70% chance of success in the best-case scenario. And even if everything goes well, Chloe will need months of rehabilitation, of medical follow-up." "I know," he interrupted her, "and I will be there for all of it. I will never again let my daughter face anything all alone." The determination in his voice was absolute, and Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. Finally, after so many years, Chloe was going to have a present father in her life. Whatever happened between Alexander and her, their daughter would never be alone again. The last guest left around 1 a.m., leaving the estate in a relative silence. Philip had a suite prepared for Emily and Chloe, understanding that her presence would be necessary in the coming days. Chloe was still sleeping soundly, exhausted by this day rich in emotions, and Alexander carried her himself to her room, moved to finally hold his daughter in his arms. "She is so light," he whispered to Emily as he gently laid her on the bed. "Is that normal? Has she lost weight because of the illness?" "A little," admitted Emily, tenderly tucking their daughter in. "But she is doing better now. The chemotherapy weakened her a lot, but since she has been in remission, she is regaining her strength." Alexander observed Chloe's sleeping face, noting the pallor of her complexion and the faint dark circles under her eyes. His daughter was sick, truly sick, and he hadn't been there to support her. "I am sorry," he said suddenly, his voice breaking. "I am so sorry I wasn't there, Emily, for her birth, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, and now for her illness. What kind of father am I?" Emily placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You are not to blame, Alexander. You didn't know she existed. And now that you know, you are here. That is what matters." They remained silent for a moment, watching Chloe sleep, united in their love for this child they had created together and whom life had separated from them. "She looks like you when she sleeps," whispered Emily. "She has your serious expression, as if she were thinking about important things even while dreaming." Alexander smiled, touched by this observation. "And she has your determination. This afternoon, when she absolutely wanted to feed the ducks, she reminded me of you when you had an idea in your head." "I hope she will also have your strength to face what awaits her," said Emily with emotion. "She's going to need all of our courage." "She will have it," Alexander promised. "We will be strong for her, both of us." The both of us resonated between them like a promise and a question at the same time. Was he really capable of forming a team for their daughter after everything that had happened between them? They tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door ajar so they could hear Chloe if she woke up. In the dimly lit hallway of the estate, they found themselves face to face, suddenly aware that they were alone for the first time in hours. The atmosphere between them was charged with contradictory emotions: regrets of the past, hope for the future, mutual attraction that they no longer dared to admit. "I'd better go to sleep," said Emily, breaking the silence that was becoming embarrassing. Tomorrow will be a long day. Alexander nodded but made no move to walk away. Emily, he suddenly said, I know we can't erase the past, but I wish we could be friends. For Chloe, but also for us. I missed you so much. This confession moved Emily more than she wanted to admit. I missed you too, she confessed, more than I would have liked. But Alexander, you are married now. We must be very careful with our feelings. Chloe needs us to be balanced, not to create more complications. I know, he said. You are right. But knowing that you don't hate me, that maybe we could be friends again, it gives me hope. Good night, Alexander, said Emily softly as she headed toward her room. Good night, Emily, he replied, watching her walk away. When she had disappeared into her room, he stood rooted in the hallway for a moment, his heart pounding. His life had just completely turned upside down, and he didn't yet know where he was headed. But one thing was sure, he would never give up his daughter. Whatever the consequences, he finally headed to his own room where Caroline was waiting for him. She was sitting at her vanity, removing her makeup with slow, meticulous movements. In the mirror, their eyes met, and Alexander saw all the fatigue and sadness that his wife had hidden all evening behind her facade smile. How is she? Asked Caroline without turning around. She is sleeping. She is exhausted by all these emotions. Alexander approached her, hesitating. Caroline, I know this day has been terrible for you. I know none of this was planned, and I... Don't apologize, she interrupted him. You are not to blame. This situation is beyond all of us. She finally turned to him, and he saw that she had been crying. Just tell me one thing, Alexander. Are you happy to have discovered your daughter's existence? The question was a trap, but Alexander decided to be honest. Yes, he replied without hesitation. Despite the circumstances, despite the complexity of the situation, yes, I am happy to know that Chloe exists. She is extraordinary, Caroline. Intelligent, funny, endearing. I cannot regret having met her. Caroline nodded as if this answer confirmed what she already knew. And her mother? She asked in a voice she tried to keep neutral. What do you feel upon seeing her again? This question was even more difficult, and Alexander took the time to think before answering. I feel many things, he finally said. Guilt for the way we separated. Admiration for the strength she showed in raising Chloe alone. Gratitude for coming to find me despite everything that happened between us. And love, insisted Caroline. Do you still feel love for her? Alexander closed his eyes, unable to hold his wife's gaze. I don't know, he confessed. I thought I had moved on, but seeing her today awakened things I thought were buried. But Caroline, that doesn't change my feelings for you. You are my wife, and I want our marriage to work. Even if she were free. Even if she wanted you. Caroline's voice was now heavy with pain, and Alexander realized that his wife was suffering more than she wanted to show. Caroline, please, don't ask me to answer hypothetical questions. The reality is that you are my wife, that Emily has her own life, and that we must all learn to coexist for Chloe's sake. You are not answering my question, insisted Caroline. Because you already know the answer, don't you? If that woman held out her hand to you, you would take it without hesitation. You would give up on me, on our marriage, on everything we have built together. Her voice broke on the last words, and Alexander felt his heart squeeze. He didn't want to hurt Caroline, but he couldn't lie to her either. I don't know what I will do, he said sincerely. All this is too recent, too overwhelming. I need time to understand what I am feeling, to see clearly in my emotions. But Caroline, I promise you one thing. I will be honest with you if my feelings change. If I realize I cannot be the husband you deserve, I will tell you. You do not deserve to be lied to or to be stayed with out of pity. Caroline looked at him for a long time, and he saw a succession of emotions pass through her eyes. Pain, anger, resignation, but also a form of respect for his honesty. That is all I can ask of you, she finally said. Honesty, even if the truth hurts. She got up and walked to the bed, her slow and tired movements betraying the emotional exhaustion of the day. "Where are you going to sleep?" she asked, seeing that Alexander wasn't moving. "In my office," he replied. "I think we both need space to think." Caroline nodded. "Good night, Alexander," she said, slipping under the covers. "Good night, Caroline. And thank you. Thank you for what? For being so kind to Chloe tonight. You could have been cold or hostile, but you were wonderful with her. It means a lot to me." Caroline gave a sad smile. "She is not to blame for this mess. And besides, she is adorable. How could anyone not love her?" With these words, she turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. Alexander remained motionless for a moment, then left the room silently. He headed for his office, a room he had set up in a wing of the estate, which served as his refuge when he needed to think. The walls were covered with books, and a large bay window looked out onto the moonlit gardens. Alexander settled into his leather armchair and contemplated the night, trying to take stock of this day that had changed everything. He was a father. This thought filled him with a joy he had never felt before, mixed with a panicked terror at the idea that his daughter was sick. Chloe was everything he had ever dreamed of in a child. Intelligent, funny, affectionate, curious about everything. In a few hours, she had completely conquered his heart. He was ready to do anything to save her, even to give his own life if necessary. Emily. Seeing Emily again had been like taking a punch to the stomach. All the emotions he thought he had overcome had returned in full force. The love, the desire, the regrets, the guilt. She was even more beautiful than before, but above all, she had acquired a strength and maturity that made her even more attractive. The way she had raised their daughter alone, the way she faced the illness with courage, the way she had come to see him despite their painful past. All of it commanded his admiration. And Caroline. His poor wife who found herself caught in a storm she hadn't seen coming. Alexander sincerely loved her, but he was beginning to realize that their love was perhaps more affection and mutual esteem than true passion. Caroline deserved better than a husband who dreamed of another woman. But how to tell her that on the day after their wedding? Many of you have followed this captivating story up to here. Do not hesitate to leave a like if you wish to know the rest of the events. What do you think of the dilemmas Alexander is facing? How do you see the continuation of this complex story between the love of the past, the obligations of the present, and the hope for Chloe's future? Share your impressions in the comments. Your opinions matter immensely for the continuation of this emotional saga.